and Simba Pundani and Alvandre Galant is working on it. They are going to put up a PowerPoint just now. That's what it looks like, but they will help you and assist you just now with what you need to do. We will just wait for 2 or so more minutes and then we will start.
Morning, colleagues. So for the Wi-Fi connectivity, for those of you who are guests who are not already embedded here at SU, these are the login details. So we have 2 major users for the mobile devices, which is Samsung. We have Apple devices. So for Samsung or any Android device, you just have to go to EduRoam, but you have to long press EduRoam so that you get the settings. When you get to the settings, you don't have to make the network private. If the network is private, you won't be able to connect. So you don't have to select private settings, okay? Then for Apple devices, you just have to choose the PWD method. Then automatically you'll be asked the username and the password. And if you need any clarity and you're struggling, you just come to the desk and we'll be willing and able to assist you. Thank you.
So Simba has already said what I wanted to say, that those 2 guys, I'm sure that if you are struggling to get access, they will assist you during lunchtime. My name is Marietjie Oelofsen, and I'm the manager of the Ubuntu Dialogues project at Stellenbosch University at the museum. And I want to welcome you with my whole heart. And I'm not saying that it's not just words. I am very, very happy to see so many faces that until now, or until Sunday and yesterday, I have only seen on a screen. It is absolute joy to see you in person, so welcome. I don't want to say, I want to introduce to you the person who is going to start this conference, Ashwin Thyssen. He is a seminar exchange fellow, and he is also a junior lecturer here at the Faculty of Theology. Last night, we were reminded by Dr. Leslie van Rooy, Prof Nico Koopman, Professor Long, that we come from broken communities, broken institutions, broken towns. And we are sitting here also in a space burdened by the wrongs of the past. Wrongs perpetrated not by the institution, but by the human beings that make up that institution. So I want to ask Ashwin, this is our effort to acknowledge and to recognize that burden of the building, also the building and the institution where we are having this conference. And I want to ask Ashwin to lead us in that. Thank you.
Greetings, honored guests. Our dean at the faculty, Professor Reggie has made an apology that he could not attend the session this morning. So the task is mine to offer a contextualization of this building, of this space, or at least provide an attempt at doing so. This building hosts as much contestation as it does comfort. In truth, colleagues, the space is as problematic as it is bursting with potential. This then raises the question, what symbolic meanings in the plural does this old Cape Dutch building have for our deliberations? Since my day job is teaching church history, allow me briefly to narrate the history of this building. I will do so by noting three rather important dates in the life of this building. The first being 1687, the second 1859, and then the third 2022. The history of this site, of course, does not start with the arrival of what Umasikele terms the colonial man. For thousands of years before the arrival of the Dutch settlers, the Sonkwa and the Khoikhoi peoples have resided in this region. The place that is today known as Stellenbosch was for these peoples, the grounds for their herding, for their hurting, and for their healing. It is in this region where they led their lives. In my estimation, it does us well to recognize this as we set out to come to terms with what the space symbolizes. So the first date, that's the first date, 1687. The settler colonial history of this building in particular starts in the 1680s with Simon van der Stel, who had journeyed more inland from the Cape. Following van der Stel's movement, Dutch settlers were now given land for the erection of the Droste, a church and residential homes. To be sure, because the historians of the time did not consider it noteworthy, we are left to one the purpose of the Droste, a stark symbol of settler colonialism. This brings us to the second period, the second date, starting in 1859. By then, the Dutch Reformed Church played a profoundly important role in Southern Africa. And at that stage, in 1859, it inaugurated this building as its theological seminary and serving the purpose of training its pastors. During this period, the area of Stellenbosch was being greatly developed. By 1918, Stellenbosch University would be established, recreating this place into a university town. In this century, of course, this building became rather representative of conflicting streams of thought. At a time when there was a growing sentiment of Afrikaner nationalism, much endorsed by the very theologians who were teaching at this place, there was also a subaltern resistance by those who opposed the colonial logic of a folk theology, of a people's theology, an exclusivist theology. Some years before 1948, when the National Party ascended to power, it was this theological seminary's Professor Gardiner who played an influential role in the development of the apartheid policy. In truth, it was in these supposedly hallowed halls where the religious and moral justification of apartheid was not only conceptualized, but also articulated. For the locals, racism, I argue, is as Stellenbosch as brandy and Coke. So, as mentioned, There were voices of resistance against apartheid as ideology and religious conviction. This then brings us to the final date, 2022, today. Since the dark days of apartheid, much has changed. This building is now home to students from different faith commitments, not just the Dutch Reformed Church. This building provides an intellectual home for students from a diversity of cultures, not just white men, Afrikaner white men. And quite importantly, as Faculty of Theology, which is a constitutive part of Stellenbosch University, we now affirm a commitment to the values of justice, transformation, and excellence. This college is the building we are meeting in today and the days to come. In recent days, and for the last few months, I have also been ashamed of being linked to Stellenbosch University. As you may be aware, over this past weekend, one student urinated on the belongings of another. Sadly, this is no single incident. This has happened before, just some months ago. The year 2022, it would seem to me, is the year of urination at Stellenbosch University. Differently put, the piss is on the wall. How then are we to reflect on Ubuntu in the course of these days, here at this place? A place that represents not only the dehumanization of colonialism, but also the indignity of apartheid. How do we affirm our collective dignity in a space where it seems that the dehumanization of the past is not dead, much less exercised? Meeting here at the Faculty of Theology, I offer this welcome, that the values of justice, transformation, and of excellence shape our time together. Outside the main entrance of this building, which I'm sure most of us entered, these words are emblazoned on the facade. Sul Justitia illustra nos. The sun of justice illuminates us. Perhaps then, it is this very sun of justice that will be able to dry and disinfect the urine that is on the wall. Gathering in this place today and those days to come, we are offered this invitation to rethink, to revisit, to reimagine. Perhaps gathering in this place, the very intellectual home of apartheid. We are offered, all of us, the opportunity to return to the insights of Ubuntu as a way of life. Kai Gangans, thank you very much.
I actually know now why we have put the chairs here, because it's quite a long way to walk from there to here. Thank you very much, Ashwin. And I think when we started to organize this conference, it was really important for us to think, to create a space that allow for thoughtfulness and for thinking. To make it, and I do hope that that set also the scene, to be conscious of where we are here and when we are at the museum for the evening functions, that we are here. There's an expression in Xhosa, which I don't pretend that I can speak, that says, if someone asks you, how are you? And you say, Dikona, and it means I'm here. And I hope that you are all here for the next few days. The next, I'm going to introduce my manager and the principal investigator of the Ubuntu Dialogues project, who is going to bring greetings and from the project side. And you know, when I read a bio, I realize how inadequate that is actually to explain really who a human being is. But Bongani is the director of the Stellenbosch University Museum and the principal investigator of the Ubuntu Dialogues project, along with Professor Jamie Monson, who my colleague, Dr. Upenyu Majee, will introduce, and who is bringing us recorded greetings because unfortunately she can't be with us today. So Bongani, it says here, was instrumental in the establishment of the Luandle Migrant Labor Museum, which remains one of the first and few community-based museums in South Africa. And I think that also says something about Bungani's approach to what the museum space should look like and what it should be. That it should be community-based, that it should be open, that it should be accessible. And I want to thank him for that attitude towards that space. So without further ado, I want to welcome you and thank you, Bongani.
Thank you so much, Marietjie, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Ashwin, for giving us a historical overview of this space. In my earlier days, I trained as a historian, so I could relate to the story that you told. Professor Dean Chris Long and the Spartan team, Professor Ratele, our Ubuntu Academic Exchange Fellows, Ubuntu Graduate Fellows from Stellenbosch University and Michigan State University, invited speakers, colleagues from cultural institutions in the US and South Africa, ladies and gentlemen. In South Africa, we say all protocol is observed. It means if I haven't acknowledged you, that word will cover you. I come from a museum. So in museums, we are very good. I'm very happy that Patrina is here, is also from a museum. She will relate to this. We are not very good at arranging words in museums. We are very good at arranging objects. So I hope out of this engagement, you will teach us how to arrange words instead of arranging objects. I've been asked on behalf of the organizing team and on behalf of my copy-I, Professor Jamie Monson, who could not be with us today, and the entire organizing team, to welcome you to the Ubuntu Dialogue Conference in Stellenbosch. I am very, very happy to see that you all have arrived safely, despite the travel challenges of the world. Slowly emerging from a global pandemic. I'm very happy that you all here and there were no hitches. Please allow me, as a way of introduction for those who were not present last night, to talk briefly about the Ubuntu Dialogues project, especially for those who are not familiar with it. The Ubuntu Dialogues project is an exchange program that started in 2019 between Stellenbosch University in South Africa and Michigan State University in the United States. This program has been made possible by the generous support of the Mellon Foundation. As the Ubuntu Dialogue project team, we thank the Mellon Foundation for being patient with us, especially in the midst of a pandemic, and for allowing us to make the necessary adjustments. Those who will remember, the project was supposed to be a kind of a cross-cultural exchange where we were supposed to send scholars to MSU, and then the MSU scholars were supposed to come to South Africa. But because of the travel bans, it became impossible. And the Mellon Foundation was very kind to say, please make the adjustments as necessary. So we are very grateful for that. So in 2019, Stellenbosch University and Michigan State University signed a 5-year cooperation agreement covering learning and teaching, research and community engagement. I must acknowledge the role played by Professor Kat Dewhurst, who is with us today, and Professor Marsha McDowell, who's also present here in Stellenbosch, and Professor Jamie Monson, the outgoing director of the African Studies Center, for facilitating the cooperation agreement that we have with Michigan State University. It is the main aim of the Ubuntu Dialogues, ladies and gentlemen, to build bridges between young people in South Africa and the United States. I also want to thank the Alliance for African Partnership for providing seed funding for the initial planning stages of the project. In the last 4 years, Ubuntu Dialogues, as we have heard last night, has enabled 59 students from Michigan State University and Stellenbosch University to engage in facilitated online conversations on themes such as decolonization, Black Lives Matter, and other contemporary topics. Some of the fellows are actually here. I'm grateful that you are all here. This project was later extended to include universities such as Tuskegee University, Howard University, and Florida University. In the second component of the Ubuntu Dialogues is the graduate fellowship. The aim of this project was to place interns at partner institutions in South Africa and the US. However, this element of the project was disrupted by COVID-19. The third component of Ubuntu Dialogues is an academic seminar exchange program, whose purpose is to enable scholars between United States and South Africa to engage in dialogue on the concept of Ubuntu. This program has benefited 24 scholars, both from South Africa and the United States. I was very happy to see some of the scholars have actually were students when they participated in the program, and some of them have PhDs. So it's really, I mean, it's good to see the impact of such a project in such a short space of time. The last component of the project is a digital platform. The purpose of this component is to bridge the digital divide between the global north and the global south, and to create spaces for conversations about global issues. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of today's conference is to bring together academic exchange fellows, graduate fellows, and colleagues from our participating institutions to revisit, rethink, and reimagine the concept and practice of Ubuntu. In the wake of global pandemics, global wars, migrations, climate change, the rise of nationalism and inequalities between the West and the rest, global dialogues on Ubuntu have become very urgent. In revisiting, rethinking, and reimagining Ubuntu, we must be cognizant of the need to reimagine the notion of dialogue itself. Museums as institutions of public culture are very central to the process of imagination. Museums are no longer dusty places dedicated only to the display of artifacts. They can no longer afford to be spaces for single master narratives. Museums are increasingly becoming spaces of dialogue about the past, the present, and the future. It is for this reason that I must acknowledge and thank all the museums that have journeyed with us on this process of revisiting, rethinking, and reimagining Ubuntu in an increasingly changing world. Before I conclude, let me, on behalf of the organizing committee, thank all the Ubuntu fellows present today, the speakers, facilitators, artists, practitioners, and members of the audience for being with us today. The conference program, as you have seen, caters for diverse interests. Themes like transformation, social justice, feminism, gender equality, spaces for dialogues, politics of knowledge production, human rights, etc., will all come under the spotlight this week. And so I wish you all a very fruitful conference, and we look forward to learn more about each other's work and look at synergies and possibilities of taking these conversations forward. On behalf of the Ubuntu Dialogues team, it is my privilege, ladies and gentlemen, to invite you all to become part of the conversations. I thank you all.
Thank you, Bongani, for the greetings, and good morning, everyone. I have been asked to introduce Professor Jamie Monson, who is the PI for Ubuntu Dialogues at Michigan State University. Unfortunately, as you already know, Professor Monson can't be here in person, but I would like to take a moment to say a few things. If we are interested in the formal profile description, the QR code in your programs will take you there. I have worked with Professor Jamie Monson for the past 4 years or so, and I want to speak from my own interactions with her before we can play a video clip of the recording that she is sending, or the greetings she's sending to us. One of the things that has been striking to me in working with Jamie Monson is her willingness to engage with some of the critical aspects of African studies. Some of us who work in African studies programs are very aware of some of the very deeply seated political contradictions, but also complications about doing African studies in the US or outside the continent. As most of us know, there is sometimes a very troubled relationship between African studies programs or African studies centers that are run from the American side of things and African-American departments of programs. And the funding for African studies programs or centers that comes from the US government, if we read the history, we see some of the difficulties of doing work. In other words, it's almost like gazing at Africa from outside, but also prescribing solutions that have very little to do with the context within which Africa or Africans exist. So Professor Jamie Monson has been willing, in my time working with her, she has been willing to engage with some of the critical aspects of doing work with Africa, but also doing work in Africa. And some of these, I'm going to give you 2 examples of this willingness to engage with these critical aspects. I started my work as project manager for Ubuntu Dialogues at Michigan State in 2019. A few years into my starting this position, I took Professor Jamie Monson with me to UW-Madison, where I did my PhD work. And we did a conference there on decolonizing African studies. And the process of working through this conference, but also actually doing the conference, there were these very raw emotions that people have about how to describe who is an Africanist, who is an African, and engaging with those conversations was an important part of bringing Professor Jamie Monson, but also the willingness that she had to be part of these conversations. This year, early this year in 2022, we participated with a team from MSU, but also elsewhere. We participated in a conference put by Indiana University on, and our panel session had something to do with engaging the contradictions of decolonial pedagogies and practices within development studies. And again, in this conference, Professor Jamie Monson did a paper on colonial legacies of development in Africa, and speaking from her position as the director of the African Studies Center at MSU. I want to end by mentioning that this willingness that she had to engage with critical aspects of African studies is what made it possible for us at MSU, working together with Stellenbosch University, made it possible for us to, I'm using Dean Chris Long's language from yesterday. We are bursting at the seams because we are trying to think outside of doing a collaboration between 2 universities, Stellenbosch and MSU. We are also trying to think beyond doing work in South Africa and the US. The imagining that we have for Ubuntu Dialogues goes beyond 2 universities, 2 countries. And maybe you hear quite a little bit about this as we progress with the conference in terms of how we are reimagining the work of Ubuntu Dialogues. So thank you to Professor Jamie Monson. You are going to hear her remarks next, but I wanted also to end by acknowledging Professor Leo Zulu, who is the current interim director for African Studies at Michigan State. Thank you, Professor Leo Zulu, for being among us. If you don't know him, I'm going to ask him to wave at us. He's shepherding the work that we do in Michigan right now. So thank you so much. Professor Jamie Monson will give us a few remarks and greetings from MSU.
Greetings to all. With this video, I'm sending you all a very warm welcome from Minnesota in the US. I dearly wish I could be there in person. Please know that I am with you in spirit in Cape Town. I want to express my deep gratitude to my co-principal investigator, Bongani Mgijima, the director of the Stellenbosch University Museum, and also to our two dynamic project managers, Upenyu Majee and Marietjie Oelofsen. And gratitude to Stellenbosch University for hosting this conference, and to all of our colleagues from MSU, many of whom have organized to bring so many of our partners, students, faculty, and leadership to be here in person at long last, to explore the theme of Ubuntu together, and to celebrate this culminating moment for the Andrew W. Mellon-funded Ubuntu Dialogues project. This project began when Marcia McDowell and Kurt Dewhurst came to visit me in the African Studies Center in 2016 at Michigan State University. And they asked me if I would be interested in creating a learning event in Cape Town to coincide with the quilt exhibition. Just at that moment in the African Studies Center, we were exploring our history and reimagining the future of partnership between Michigan State University and African institutions and communities. We were launching a new partnership initiative, the AAP. So I told Marcia and Kurt that we would be interested in doing something in Cape Town, but we would like for it to be a partnership rather than event. And then Lisa Fruget and I traveled to Cape Town, where we met with Bongani and his team. And that was the moment that this partnership started rolling. Subsequently, South African partners, Kurt and Marcia, and US partners based in Detroit, East Lansing, and Washington received seed funding from the AAP to do outreach, bringing practitioners from museums to MSU and all over the United States, and also to Cape Town. This evolved then into the Mellon Grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation that expanded the exchanges to include faculty and students from our two institutions. The COVID pandemic threw a wrench into our plans to do exchange visits and bring people back and forth between South Africa and Michigan State. It caused us to do most of our programming virtually, but this had the beneficial effect of expanding the scope of participation. We dearly missed the person-to-person engagement, but we were able to bring in new partners that we hadn't imagined including before. This conference is our opportunity to get back to the person-to-person engagement for people who have been engaging virtually, sometimes for years. And finally, they have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to deepen your relationships with one another here in Cape Town. Relationship. This for me is what is at the heart of Ubuntu as a philosophy, and what is at the heart of this project and its history. Our clear focus on partnership, mutual cooperation, reciprocity, transparency, and other values have shaped the project from its inception. I believe that this is another example of Ubuntu in practice. And lastly, I was asked to reflect on what is Ubuntu to me. And I go back to my first time to live and work in Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya when I was only in my early 20s. And I learned the Swahili language. And I was living in a village in Taita Hills in Kenya, where so much importance was placed on greeting people. Even in Swahili language classes, greetings took weeks, it seemed. And this was so new to me as a young American woman. The importance of taking time to really connect with people, to not just greet in a superfluous way, but deeply inquire, how are you? How is your family? How is your farm? How is work? How's your grandmother? All of these questions were very important, and the means to communicate them were different for different relationships. So through learning the language, I learned the importance of relationships, and these values have stayed with me all of these years of my life. So that is Ubuntu to me: relationships, greeting, spending deep time getting to know one another, and reenacting that relationship each time we greet one another again and again in our lives. So I'm going to stop there and thank you all so much for allowing me to join you on this Zoom video, and send my warm greetings from Minnesota, where it's beginning to get colder, and thinking of all of you. And please know I'm with you in spirit. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Jamie, who went to the trouble to put that together and be with us in this way. I'm not sure she was thinking about also joining us via Zoom link, so she might actually be here in the room somewhere. It is an ungodly time in the US, so maybe not. But if she is here, we are saying hello and we thank her for her contribution, also as principal investigator over the past 3 years. And I also want to thank my colleague, my dear colleague and friend, who has become a friend over the past 3 years, Upenyu Majee at Michigan State University. Thank you very much. Professor Marsha McDowell, who Jamie mentioned, was going to be here this morning, but she is unfortunately not well, and she will not join Professor Ratele as a respondent. Professor Dewist, whom Jamie mentioned, is here, however, and he will no doubt during the question time make the contributions that are necessary. You can, as was said, the QR codes will take you to Professor McDowell's her information, but she strikes me, I don't know her very well, but the kind of work that she does strikes me as that kind of interesting work from a different, with materials and quilts and tactile stuff. That seems interesting. She's the curator of folk arts and quilt studies at MSU Museum, professor at the Department of Art and Art History, the director of the Quilt Index and the Michigan Stained Glass Census. And she's also the director of the Michigan Traditional Arts Program, the Residential College of Arts and Humanities. I know many of you know her well, and I hope that we will get another chance to connect with her during this conference. I have to be honest with you that as a white person, I have found the concept of Ubuntu as a somewhat hot potato. At the best of times, it was this aspirational idea that I was not sure if I could, not just in the sense of, am I appropriating something that is not authentically part of my lived experience, but do I have the right to claim it? And if I do, how? In the middle somewhere was a deep suspicion of easy ways of explaining Ubuntu, that it would bring about a rainbow nation, or it would be the solution to all problems. That also didn't sit easy with me. At the worst of times, I sang with a choir that dismissed its existence in the face of staggering violent behavior that we see around us. My involvement in this project brought new insights and a deep conviction that Ubuntu is indeed part of my story, and it's my work to figure out how. It is a radical idea, and it requires time, the deep time that Jamie was talking about. It's not just relationships, it is radical relationships. And in my head, we are busy getting our heads around what that really means. And I want to make a plea for time, and I'm sorry to say also money, for the luxury of projects like this to help in that figuring out work. When we thought about this session, the idea was for us all to think, what does Ubuntu have to do with me? We come from different contexts, different languages, different race groups, different gender. What does it have to do with me? To settle that in this first session. And I couldn't think of a better person to help us do that than Professor Kopano Ratele. And I can read his bio, but you can read it on your own as well. So I want to share with you a social media post that Professor Ratele posted almost a little bit more than 2 months ago, like August 2022. And this is his post. 12 months have passed since I arrived at Stellenbosch University. The question I was asked by friends and acquaintances when I would inform them I'm joining Stellenbosch still rings in my mind. But Stellenbosch? And then they would say, though not always out loud, good luck with that. I would like to admit that looking back at the past year, I feel like a failure, but I am not regretting it, not entirely. I'm learning how change happens or does not happen. And just as we are learning about our staggering democracy, I am learning that progress does not happen in a straight line. And sometime you will not know which way is up. Don't get me wrong, I have been treated well by everyone with whom I have interacted. I have enjoyed teaching, even winning an award for some of my teaching. I published a book and several papers. I have friendly and collegial co-workers. However, I suspect I will not shake this feeling of failing till my last day at the university. The university, from listening, watching, talking to others and walking it, seems to me, is not going to look and feel very different for a long time. Not unless something dramatic happens. The university and the town which turns around it are a curious racial experiment. Stellenbosch, people often say, is beautiful, but you don't have to be Jordan Peele to realize that it is a disturbing beauty, covering a disturbing sense of being in the world. I do not think Black talent playing singles is going to change Stellenbosch. Doubles then? No, not again, but more like a building site. I think avoiding Stellenbosch because of incidents such as the vile white masculine racist acts at residences that we witnessed this year, and unfortunately again very recently, is not the answer. It won't help white people to see how disturbing white enclaves are if anti-racists ignore them. And it won't help colored and African people to stay away because Stellenbosch is a well-resourced, well-run public institution that should benefit all of us. It is not, in my view, in the best interest of Stellenbosch for the best Black students and scholars to go to Wits or Venda, Nelson Mandela University, Tshwane University of Technology, or the University of Cape Town, and not in the best interest of Black scholars and students to run away from fear of failing to change Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch, like all these other institutions, needs the most creative, radical, innovative, and grittiest colored, and blacks that the world have. Change is gonna come, even if that will be when we are gone. And I wanted to thank you because it immediately, if you have a project like the Ubuntu Dialogues project, what do you leave behind after 3 or 4 years? And that sense of explaining that it might be a failure, but it can go on and we are needed. And you, all of you, the student fellows, the seminar exchange fellows, I hope you feel needed as part of this project to rethink, revisit, and reimagine that radical notion of Ubuntu. And with that, I want to ask Prof Ratele. We are flexible. I don't know what would be easier for you, to stand here or to sit. The initial idea was, because Professor McDowell was going to join Professor Ratele, to keep it sort of conversational, but I'm open for flexibility. Yeah.
Do you want to know what a surprising thing you'll hear when you ask young African men who are motivated to achieve what will make them happy in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Do you know what it is? I want to build my mother a house. It is a common refrain you will hear from them. Or a version of that, I want to take care of my parents, build them a house. That is how a person will say it. Of course, the same sentiments you will hear from young African women. So thank you to the principals, Bongani and Professor Jamie Monson, and the project managers. Thank you, Marietjie. And thank you from Michigan State and all of you at Stellenbosch and over there. And this week, by the way, was Ashwin. We failed again, as you know, over the weekend. Once again, this constant feeling of failure was experienced, and I got attacked on social media. What are you doing there? Once again. So I want to build my mother a house, young men and young women will say, but I study masculinities. So masculinities, boys, men, is what I'm going to talk to you about for the next 16, 17 to about 20 minutes. I'm instructed that because my interlocutor is not feeling well, I can take a little bit longer. So I'll be a little slow and just taking us through this. So what I just said may not surprise some of you in this building. The young Black men and women in this country, I'm sure elsewhere in the world, are always thinking about helping their parents. However, when I started to hear what they were saying, I realized how singular this attitude is. Most of you will recognize that we live in a society where the I comes first. We're encouraged at every corner. You watch television, you watch Rishi Sunak yesterday, or his Truss, or you watch our politicians, and they encourage us, many of them at every corner, to think of me first. And of course, we are in this country observing Ubuntu in disrepair. And I will use Ubuntu because it rolls easy on my tongue instead of Ubuntu. if I'm not to be stumbling over my words. So Ubuntu or Ubuntu is in disrepair. So it was only when I paused at some point, a while back, when I built my mother a house, and I started working and stopped taking it for granted. Actually, it happened much later. And I felt, actually, I've always wanted to do this. When I stopped taking for granted, I said, of course, you have to take care of your parents if they need your help. And that the value of this value begin to fully strike me what it is. So even though it may have frayed, it may have come unstitched at the seams, this value of taking care of each other defines a certain way of being in the world for some people. It lies at the center of being human for some people. Evan? In a previous book, in my previous book, Liberating Masculinities, I wrote about the hegemonic form of masculinity that imprisons too many of us, men, but also, of course, endangers the lives of women and children and non-conforming genders here in Russia, Latvia, and China, in Iran, right now, all over the world. I pointed out the untenability of this form of masculinity, which is the dominant form of how to be a man in our society. At some point, like cars, this form of masculinity stops working, stops rewarding you, for most of us, as much as it might have done at some point in your life. It needs too much effort, too much time to keep it working. And then I suggested in that book, there at the top, with other books on masculinity that I read and reread several times every so often, I suggested the need to do some transformative work with boys and men, change, and get out of this prison. And it is really a box, a prison, the moment you start thinking about it. What I did not say, that I did not offer, is a clear idea of what we need and how to transform our lives, and of course the lives of people we're in relation with, our families, our mothers, our fathers, our students, our communities. Last month, I published a new book. I'm plugging it, I'm selling it, it's there at the corner. And it's called Why Men Hurt Women, and Other Reflections on Love, Violence, and Masculinity. Now, if you look at the book, I have it here as well. You look at the book from the cover, that I place, increasingly, I place a great value on this thing called love. And some of you might recognize the words I'm just about to use. Without pumping love into boys and men, we cannot stop the hurting. We must address boys and men's feelings of being unworthy of nourishing love or sustaining love. But you could ask, what does all of this, what does love have to do with the main topic of this dialogue? Ubuntu. A lot, actually, I want to suggest. I want to say three things before I turn back to say something about love. And I see one or two people here, Luis and Shala here, who will have had parts of this First thing I want to say, men need love. I mean, it sounds stupid, doesn't it? Men need love as much as little girls, little boys, adult women, non-conforming genders. Adult men are not always fully comfortable to admit this unavoidable need for others. But we depend on others to take care of us, and to take care of our families, take care of your children if you have children, take care of our communities, our churches. In fact, in the previous slide, you'll have seen one of the books, maybe you didn't see it quite as well. As the African-American cultural theorist Bell Hooks said, men, we prefer to be feared more than we prefer to be loved. We take power as the privilege to dominate others, to have the last word, to instill fear, instead of positioning ourselves when we have positions, when we have a seat at the table to facilitate the growth of others, to nurture them, to build community, build each other. So we take power in the negative sense. Now, regarding this man's need for love, I want to say, I went back and looked at the number of people who might have said this. And although I take leave of this particular person, not because he's American and American-centric in his thought, a key idea with which I agree comes from Abraham Maslow, American psychologist, who came up with the theory of hierarchy of needs, of basic human needs. You might know this. And I have found an updated graphic of his. And then there's the other one, the normal one. So that was the first thing. Secondly, many of us are aware, or rather, are not aware, or minimize that a kind of love, in-group love, is the sticky stuff that bonds us to each other. It's a kind of love that's this idea of belonging, the family, friendship, shared values, all of that, you can use the word love for. Love is at the center of groups as much as dyadic relationships. Love is a social need, not just a personal need. All cultures need something that we can rightly call love to flourish. We need festivals, we need conferences where we talk and dialogue with each other. We need rituals, we need stories. Stories are big. We need myth makers, artists. I am including artists in there, and we have a number of artists in this program. We need institutions that nourish us, that don't only want to extract, that do not only work on an extractivist mode, but that nourish us so that we can build those institutions. We need institutions that build we-ness. And love is, of course, a political sentiment. We have to love, quote unquote, the leader. So let me say something about Mandela, but not quite, because we're talking about Ubuntu. I could say something about Bishop Tutu, the Archbishop, who was, I recommend at the Desmond Tutu and Leah Tutu Foundation, Legacy Foundation in the city. They have a permanent exhibition that I recommend. I went there about 3 weeks back. So about Mandela, because we wrongly take love to be something that only or mainly happens in interpersonal relationships, it is not surprising that love was not seen as a basic need by Mandela's government. And of course, I'm not even talking about the subsequent government, the Mbeki government, the Mkante government, and certainly not the Zuma government. Maybe there's a little bit now, but not not too much, because of the national plan. Maybe you can find words care in the national plan is called the National Strategic Plan Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Came out a few years back, 2018, that might be around 2018, maybe 2019, after young activists, women, and non-conforming gender activists went and demanded that we are hurting. Men are hurting us too much, as though there was too little. Men are killing women in our country. So you'll find care mentioned quite a lot in that document. Of course, there's an overlap between care and love, although they are not the same. So once again, it is not surprising that love was not seen as a basic need, as opposed to what Maslow was saying by Mandela's government. And this was in the closest program we've ever had to repair our society, to restitch what was broken, the Reconstruction and Development Program. After that, we had neoliberal programs non-stop, repeatedly, so nothing about care. So it is not surprising that in the centerpiece of Mandela's government, the RDP program, it excludes love or care, as actually they mentioned care maybe once or twice, as a basic need. And they defined basic needs as jobs, land, water, housing, electricity, telecommunications, transport, a clean and healthy environment, healthcare, and social welfare. Of course, we can be generous here. Those last two, healthcare, social welfare, are close to a kind of love. But you could also say love is implied in the conception of the return of the land, because to reconnect with your ancestral land that was stolen under racist and colonialist is a hunger to be reconnected to our past. And of course, Ashwin has spoken about these grounds indirectly and directly. Reconnection is about the need for relationality, relating to the land, to each other, to the people who came before us. But that is when we're generous, when we're reading the RDP in a generous way. So when we look closely at our public life today, the last 28 years, we are confronted, I am confronted by a less palatable reality. Many people all over the world, including in the US and in this country, are more easily aroused by fear, by hatred, and other negative emotions. We find it easier to organize. So in 2017, some of you might have been there, maybe, we marched against Jacob Zuma. It was 2018, 2017. So we always march against something. We always march against fear. I mentioned the NSP, the National Strategic Plan. It's against violence, which is right, which is correct, because sometimes we have to do this. So we find it easier to organize around hatred. Racism is about hatred. We organize against racism than around care for each other. Not very much good at organizing around care. And I would talk here about social media. And you know, the people who are familiar with this, and maybe we have analysts there, if you say something negative, something controversial, negative, something that arouses negative emotion on social media, you get a lot of responses. But if you say something, unless you're a celebrity or the Dalai Lama, or maybe somebody from Archbishop Desmond Tutu's legacy, or maybe one man, if you say something about love and your social media, you might get a lot of likes, retweets. But if you are, some of us, you have to say something negative, it's clickbait. Or the Pope, for instance. So that's one of the quickest ways to get retweets and likes. Some politicians, some of you would know this much better than me, some politicians are very good at calling Mexicans rapists and, and all of that. And because of that, it tends to generate a lot of love for them. In short, that many of us do not have enduring confidence in love or care for each other as a fundamental cultural glue. Ironically, the lack of confidence in love applies also to Black people. It's quite strange. Even though we recognize the violent hatred and fear that underline anti-Black racism, we don't organize around love. But of course, we have a history over there and here. Dr. King, Nelson Mandela, Bishop Tutu once again. We have some people who have attempted this, but they have gotten pushback since students in particular here not very happy with this reconciliatory tone about love and let's live together. Thirdly, then, one last thing, with all I have just said, this thing called love is frustratingly difficult to define. I regret sometimes when I'm asked deep questions about love, about maybe we shouldn't go there. Let's talk about masculinities first. So having spent a deal of time around the idea of love as a basic need for individuals and for society and for cultures, I would arrive at two propositions, which I write about in the book. Proposal number one, some societies have men in them, or some men in society experience themselves as not quite lovable. I know this personally, as non-essential until they have achieved something. So we think we are not essential until we have proven ourselves. We buy a car, we buy a house, we become vice chancellors or professors or SRC presidents. I also felt like that for a very long time, that I have to do something, to be something before I deserve this basic thing called love. This feeling is baked into what it means to be a man. I think more than a woman, I think so, but I'm open to be proven otherwise. And I dare say this feeling is found in other cultures. It's found in our culture that we have to be something, to do something before we become loved. And I think it also applies elsewhere. And by this idea of being unloved or loveless, and being non-essential, I mean, you find in experiences and affects, different experiences and affects, what tends to join them is their opposites of one kind or another. So under this lovelessness, you don't have, that is, a deep, nourishing self-love, love. We experience ourselves let me say this, to experience yourself as dispensable, as non-essential, is already to suffer, really, even if you don't recognize this, that even if you are not there, you are not needed. And I've done some studies around this. Just quickly, maybe 2016, 2017, I received a grant about equality. And of course, I asked about love. So I'm asking about equal relationships, families, basically. An example. So this was a survey, a large survey, a national survey, and some in-depth qualitative work and a documentary. We visit one family. And when we get there, the woman in the house has a child, I think a 9-year-old. I'm under correction. We published on this, not on this particular story, but on this study. And we asked the question, one of the questions is, so, and when we arrived that particular day, she said, I'm sorry, I can't concentrate well enough because my partner, my boyfriend, left a week ago. And I'm struggling taking care of my child and doing all sorts of chores and homemaking activities. So we asked the question, so how did he help when he was here? And guess what she said? She said, I could take 5 minutes to go see my mother while he looks after the child. 5 minutes. Out of 24 hours, 5 minutes was what made this woman happy. Maybe it's an exaggeration, maybe it's 10 minutes. But you contribute 5 to 10 minutes to looking, as we say, babysitting your child. So you don't do anything else in the house. I mean, basically, you are non-essential to requirements in one sense. But this woman felt, and then we went on, felt so wrecked that she's lost this relationship, which from us, and we could be wrong, from our perspective, working with a student called Rebecca Hellman, my student, my PhD student, that she felt that she had lost something quite important in her life. And of course, we have to listen to that. So that's about love. Some men in our society experience themselves as not quite lovable, proposition 1. And I move to proposition 2. Proposition 2, and I'm on 24 minutes. I think I should start moving a little bit more rapidly. Proposition number 2, lovelessness appears to underlie some of the violence of some men against women, against queer people, against lesbians, against gays, against other non-conforming people in our country, and children. And as you might have read, the number of children were killed in the last few months, in not last 10 months in our country, 9 to 10 months. It's just horrific. It's just unbelievable. Most of the people who do the killing are men. And of course, of a man against himself. So lovelessness appears to underlie some of this violence. And so let me stress this: lovelessness does not justify violence, and lovelessness does not underlie all of men's violence acts and words. And this feeling of being unwanted, of being unworthy of love, once again, should never be used to justify violence. So when we say, fellows, number of us says, hurt people hurt others, it does not justify hurting others. People have been hurt. So let me, in the last 3 minutes or so, say something about Ubuntu. So what does this have to do with Ubuntu again? If it's not clear, let me just make it clear. The foundation of love, as far as I can see, the foundation of love resides in this thing called Ubuntu. Ubuntu, Ubuntu. And again, you might hear echoes of Cornel West here and Dr. King, right? Ubuntu is what love looks like in daily life. Somebody spoke about greeting here. It's not just about greeting. Ubuntu, as you well know, simply indicates, in some contexts, being human. And this idea, as I tell my students all the time, this idea of being human is one of the strangest things that I know. It's a strange thing, being idea, because of consciousness, right? You reflect on your own humanness as in a daily life. The core of Ubuntu in my reading is that I make no sense without you listening to me. I'm just talking to a screen, or I'm talking to an empty wall. Without my child, without my son, without my partner, without my friends, my well-being, my happiness fundamentally depends on you. It's not you can't get out of this thing. Like Caliban, and you know the story. The interaction between humans and other animals, and between humans and the environment, this frontier, somebody calls it, is the source of both our pains and our joys. My being unfolds in relationship with others. Isn't it strange that I get happiness if my students come to me and says, I enjoyed the class. I mean, I could think, oh, today I was really flowing. But if they don't tell me this, and it's such a small joy, it's just a little tiny joy. They walk up to me, they says, Professor, this was a really great class. I just start feeling happier. And I'm like, what is this? Why am I happy? Because I prepared for this, but I need to hear them. So recognition of Ubuntu as a paradigmatic and social expression of love, indeed of any relationality, emerges from the recognition of my dependence on others. A man who comes to recognize this irrevocable need for belonging more fully soon also recognizes the invitation. It's always an invitation to treat others the way you want to be treated, to regard another person the way they would like that person to regard them. So I could consider here quickly 2 kinds of love, but if you consider sexual love from a psychological point of view or sexological point of view, that if it is correct that the need for others and to be needed is the foundation of human, sexual love is really a specification, an intensification of Ubuntu. Same thing with parental love. It is just a magnifying of this thing that others depend on us and we depend. And any parent, and maybe men are a little bit, not a little bit, quite distance from the idea of having a child, right? You have a child, but 9 months, 8 months, 2 weeks is carried by somebody. But this idea of you get joy from somebody who farts and just eats, when they smile at you, you're just like, I'm a father. It's like an intensification of the relationality, this magnification of it. So last page. We would never know what we are or who we are if we are born on a planet where we're the only humans. You'd never know who you are as a human being. And that book really is about, it is a consolidation of this idea. Given this embeddedness in social relationships of humans, given that it is what enables us to unfold ourselves, it is the core of human 101. I drive my son to school this morning, we're talking about this one particular, which I think, oh, this is really important. And I'm thinking, I am trying to make you a human being, because the children don't know how to be, that you must greet the security guard at the gate, you must greet them. Okay? On this one, I believe that you must say, Sawubona. Don't care whether this, you are smart, you win awards. This is as important as what happens in the class. So let me say this again. Lovelessness, which is another way of saying Ubuntu, in disrepair, can never explain all of the violence of men or men's suffering. Lovelessness, once again, does not justify violence, but lovelessness, meaning disrupted cultural bonds, characterizes a large terrain of Black life here and elsewhere. The experience and affects of lovelessness, that is, are enmeshed with the experience and affects of being Black men, and of course, Black women in white supremacist, patriarchal, zombifying capital societies. So racism is zombifying this country. This is the country with the most inequality in the world. It still is. And that is built into making others crave for stuff that they don't really need, because it says, here's something on the ad, here's what you need. But really what you need is your government to take care of you, to give you a basic income grant, to show you some love, as we say. So supremacy, white supremacy, patriarchy, and this extractivist capitalist structures really build this lovelessness in us. And this applies well beyond this country. And so from what we know from the transatlantic slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, a contemporary police brutality against Black men and women in the US, there's little evidence of love in that country as well. And in this country, by the way, we can talk about this country. So when police under lockdown shoot a man who's drinking or eating in their house, that's exactly what we're talking about right here. So what I have been gesturing to that is that even when we talk about Ubuntu, we should not, by which I mean we're talking about kind of love, we should not only talk about values and affects. We should also talk about institutions. We should talk about systems. We should talk about structures. Ubuntu should, at its best, be part of our institutions. In concluding, seeing as I have spoken about white supremacy, let me put it this way. Let me say this to you. The fact is that anti-Black racism is an expression of institutional, of a systemic, not only interpersonal, but a systemic denial of Ubuntu. It denies our humanness. And we have seen, Ashwin again, we have seen on our campus repeatedly, and the latest evidence over this weekend, this antipathy, some white students against Ubuntu of some students, Black students, using urine to diminish their humanity. So without Ubuntu, there can never be any kind of sustaining institution. No sustaining love, no intergroup understanding. Hence, to return to men, because a man's feeling of lovelessness may convey the large, it conveys the large social feeling that he is not quite human. Now, Babalo was in my head yesterday, and his reluctance to engage what I see as a certain reluctance. Maybe I might be wrong. So let me say this, because a man's feelings of lovelessness may convey the large social feeling that he is not quite human, not quite mortal. These affects are best understood as effects of racist institutions and structures that deform our interior lives and interactions with each other. When we understand that we are being deformed because we don't show enough love to each other. And my students who I have a film group with, every time I say we have to talk about love today, they say we have to talk about racism. I say, yes, indeed, we have to talk about racism. What we're doing here is breathing, as we call it breathe. We have to show love to each other here. So when we get out there, we are stronger for it. When we understand this and that we're always working out our humanness in relation to others, we are called to unceasingly tend to each other as we unfold what it means to be us. When we understand this, we start to see that, to misquote Stevie Wonder, Ubuntu is in need of love today. Thank you very much.
Professor Ratele, thank you very much. I know you are disappointed that you probably don't have time to engage with Prof Ratele, and I want to invite him without an imposition or pressure. But if you have time to attend any of the other sessions today or tomorrow or Thursday, you are most welcome, because I think that is the kind of thing to all of you, welcome to attend the sessions. 11 o'clock in the Murray room, 2 o'clock in the Murray room today. It's not, even if on the program there are mostly students on the panel or seminar exchange fellows on the panel, we really would like all of you to engage with all these conversations and to take the kind of input that we've just heard further and grapple with it. What does it mean? It would be wonderful if we can do it all together. Can I just quickly, last night, I don't want to keep you long. Last night I got to the hotel and I had all my intention was to just get to bed as soon as possible. And I joined a rowdy group around the swimming pool and we went to bed at 12 o'clock. And I thought, this is what I want this conference to be like. People arguing, talking about important things, disagreeing, agreeing, seeing other points of view. That's what I want this conference to be like. So please take the space. It's your space. Make the most of it. And I think Professor Ratele has given us a challenge, important, interesting, sorry, I shouldn't use the word interesting, but challenging ideas to get our heads around. And I want to thank him for that. And thank you for the challenge of thinking beyond the sort of obvious meaning of love, to think about it deeper and do the same thing, to think about that kind of love in relation to Ubuntu, and also think about Ubuntu beyond the sort of aphoristic kind of way that it is often being used. I'm sure Professor Ratele will also still join us for tea, so feel free to approach him then. I quickly just want to do a few, and I'm going to be very short, housekeeping announcements. I want to invite all of you, and I mean all of you who are here, to the Ubuntu gathering this evening, where we are inviting you to bring an object that represents your Ubuntu journey. We have a very special musician in Kabakazi Nokwana. She's a PhD student at our music department who will be, I don't want to say she will play music. I think it will be far more than that. And we have 3 lovely young facilitators. So please join us for that this evening. There's also dinner tomorrow night at Oelofsen that we will talk a little bit more about. I also want to encourage you to find out about the shuttles that will go for the field trip to Cape Town on Friday. Make sure that you know which shuttles you want to be on and at what time you want to come back. I want to urge you to attend the art exhibition, the opening of the art exhibition on Wednesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, from 4 until 5:30. Lillian Young, from the student fellow from MSU, and Paul Mamatuba, the Ubuntu Dialogues student fellow from Stellenbosch University, working with Catherine Smith. I think it's going to be a lovely opening, and I do hope you can attend that. Lastly, I wanted to say that I wanted to apologize, but I couldn't get my head, I couldn't say on behalf of Eskom, because I do not want to apologize on behalf of Eskom, the Eskom management, the Eskom board, our Minister of Public Enterprise, Betty Mantashe. I want to apologize for the inconvenience you are facing, especially in the evenings and during the night, wherever you are staying. But I want to ask you to write a letter and tell the people. That's what good citizens do, complain about the inconvenience. And to the people from the US, I don't know if this is inappropriate, vote on the 8th of November. That's what good citizens do. Thank you for attending the first session, and I really want to hope that we will see all of you tomorrow morning to join us for a conversation with Professor Louise de Tour, that is here this morning as well. We are looking forward to it. Ubuntu's conversation with feminism, in conversation with Professor Chris Long of MSU. We are really looking forward to it, and I hope to see all of you here. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. If you are confused, the rest of the day is in the Murray seminar room, and that is, if you go ask anybody at the help desk, they will assist you. But it's up the stairs and to your left. There's also a banner up there. But ask if you don't know where it is.